Hi, I'm Claire from Skipton Civic Society, and I want to take you on a pub crawl around past and present pubs and inns of Skipton. Heritage Open Days this year has had to go virtual. We usually do guided tours, but social distancing tours are difficult, so instead we are taking you on a video tour. Some of the pubs and inns are still going, and you can visit them to see their interiors as well as the exteriors. Some of the buildings are still there but are no longer pubs, and other buildings have gone. Coronavirus means that we may lose more of these favourite places in Skipton, our pubs and our inns. So please use them if and when you can and help us preserve this important traditional aspect of British culture.
We start here in Water Street at the former Commercial Inn. Like most of the pubs on the tour, it is in the Skipton Conservation Area. The pub closed less than 20 years ago and became a house and a Chinese takeaway, and it began life as the end house of some small stone terraces built for mill workers. This was known as Upper Commercial Street and stretched up the hill behind the pub. The terraces and the inn were built around 1820, and this end house was extended to become an inn called the Commercial, with an impressive frontage onto Water Street. The rest of the Commercial Street was demolished in 1964, leaving the inn here all on its own. The name Commercial was used by an inn in Caroline Square in the town centre in 1837, run by William Parkinson. And in 1827, John Batty held the Black Horse and Commercial Hotel in the marketplace, but it is not clear if this was one establishment or two. The Commercial was the only pub in Skipton that was tied to Massey's Burnley Brewery, which used the symbol of an owl and brewed Gradley beer, known as GB, amongst others. Massey's was taken over by Charrington's in 1966. Water Street and Gargrave Road were built in the late 1700s as a flatter diversion of the busy road, which later became the A65, across the Pennines to Lancashire and Cumbria. Originally this had gone over the very steep Rakes and then down through the hamlet of Thorlby. The A65 was diverted a second time to a bypass in the 1970s, but until then the Commercial Inn was well placed to serve low-income travellers. Facing the Commercial Inn, turn to your left through 90 degrees and walk up Gargrave Road, where, just beyond Ermisted's Grammar School, you'll find the Woodman Inn. The building is still there, along with the cottages in what used to be its yard, and it is still called the Woodman, but it is no longer an inn. Return to the Commercial Inn, and this time turn through 180 degrees to face the Coach Street car park, which is where the Joiners Arms used to be situated. This was a small but popular pub in a back-to-back terrace called Lower Commercial Street. It would have welcomed members of the Company of Joiners and Sealers, and it was much used when the gala took place, as the floats would set out from near here. The Joiners was substantially altered in 1885, probably to enlarge it into a neighbouring house. Lower Commercial Street was demolished in 1964. From the site of the former Joiners Arms, turn back to face the Commercial Inn, where just to the left you'll see a small archway which leads into St Stephen's Close. Now go through this archway to view the site of the former Oddfellows. Above us, through the arch, was the rest of Upper Commercial Street, which has been demolished and is now St Stephen's Close. Up there was the Oddfellows Arms, perhaps used by the Oddfellows, who then moved to a new home on Rectory Lane and are still there. The Oddfellows Arms was probably on the site of Water Street School playground. Facing the Commercial Inn, turn to your right through 90 degrees and walk round the corner where you will find Calico Jack's. Although not strictly a pub, Calico Jack's describes itself as a restaurant and bar, and the building is an interesting one, having been built as a school for mill worker children nearly 200 years ago. As you can see, you can sit outside and enjoy a drink. From Calico Jack's, turn to face across Water Street, where you'll find the site of the former William IV pub. These two houses were built on the site of the former William IV pub, which had stables backing onto Backer Beck. King William was known as Silly Billy, the Sailor King, and was king from 1830. He was old when his brother George IV died childless, and he only reigned for 7 years, but a lot of pubs across the country were named after him. The landlord here when Silly Billy died was Myers Wilkinson. Several members of the Wilkinson family became landlords in Skipton, and the Myers family were also licensees. Maybe his mother was a Myers. Closed in 1907, when the number of licenses for Skipton was reduced, it was later demolished and rebuilt as these two houses. It isn't clear where the stables were. The William IV may have gone, but it lives on in the date stones above the doors in the two new houses which replace it. Facing the William IV, turn to your left and walk along Water Street as far as the pedestrian crossing. Having crossed over at the crossing, continue along Water Street as far as the building on the corner, which is now known as Ackroyd's. Now we are where Water Street meets the old A65 road up the Rakes, and on the corner here is a fine building that was until recently the Royal Oak. It was once an inn with extensive stables at the rear and even a cow shed. The building, in fact, is 3 stories high because when the canal and Water Street were built in the late 18th century, the level on the road on each side was raised up a story, and the oak was rebuilt in the style of the day. In 1837, it was not referred to as an inn, but as the Royal Oak Tavern, run by Robert Twistleton. This view shows the cellar area of the Oak on Grassington Road. The pub closed in 2007 and became a restaurant and wine bar run by nearby Napier's restaurant. COVID-19 brought temporary closure and it has struggled to reopen fully. Check out the Napier's website. From the Royal Oak, cross over Water Street using the traffic island and then use the pedestrian crossing to cross Mill Bridge. Having crossed over, take a few minutes to look at the attractive pocket park created by the Skipton Civic Society for the Queen's Golden Jubilee. Now cross over the canal bridge where you will find David Hill's estate agents set back from the road on your left. This is the site of our next pub, the New Ship. The New Ship was new in 1750 when the Springs Canal was built and the previous building had to be demolished. Like most of Skipton's pubs, it would have had a yard with stabling reached through an archway beyond the building to the right. At one time, the pub had a painted sign of a 3-masted sailing ship, and it later became a Tetley's pub. From the New Ship, if you continue up the hill towards the church, you will come to our next pub, which is the Castle Inn on your left-hand side. So far we've found 3 existing buildings that were pubs: the Commercial, the New Ship and the Oak. Now we come to one that is still very much a welcoming pub with a fine old-style interior. This is the Castle Inn. To the right is a little building much like the New Ship in size and probably dating from about the 1600s. That is where the castle began its life as a pub, and later the innkeeper took over the imposing residence next door, which had been built for a wine merchant and had good cellars. And the two were joined up to become what is now the Castle Inn. On a fine day, the forecourt acts as the pub garden and is busy with diners and drinkers, and it does good meals, vegan included. In 1837, the publican was William Lowcock, and later it was Thomas Chippendale, the same name as an innkeeper at the Black Horse. Now it is Calvin Dow, who has won awards for his work in turning the pub into what it is today. From the Castle Inn, continue up the hill to the roundabout and cross over to the other side of the High Street using the traffic island. Having crossed the road, make your way down the High Street to our next pub, which is the Black Horse. The Black Horse Hotel is at the top of the High Street and was one of the poshest and most important watering spots in Skipton, originally reserved for those with money to spend, although their servants could also be housed. Now it's open to all, and you don't need a horse. The site was used by the Roundhead officers in the Civil War when they besieged Skipton Castle. It may have already been an inn with stabling and was rumoured to have been used by King Richard III before he became king. It was rebuilt in 1676 after the Restoration and became the King's Head, which may have been a reference to King Charles I, who lost his life and his head, or to his son Charles II. Inside there is a date stone with symbols of the butcher's trade, which are twisted fleeces, a poleaxe and cattle heads. In about 1725 it became the Black Horse. Thomas Chippendale was the innkeeper in the Georgian era, and he modernised it and built the frontage as it is today and put assembly rooms on the back. It was a fashionable hotel for gentlemen, travellers and others, and in 1807 it was the headquarters of Lord Lascelles, who was fighting an election to become a Member of Parliament. He lost the election, but the campaign made the landlord very rich. It has a covered yard that was used as a marketplace by the local Women's Institute, and it became a Whitbread pub when they took over Bentley's Brewery. It is now owned by the Stonegate Pub Company and does their standard range of meals and drinks. The Horse has a function room and a popular patio next to the canal. Check out its website. Now enter the Black Horse Yard by going through the archway immediately to the left of the pub. Having entered the yard, you'll see ahead of you at first floor level the dance hall and assembly room that has been added to the back of the pub. Turn right when leaving Black Horse Yard and continue down the High Street until you reach Just Jean's, which is the site of our next pub, the King's Arms. The King's Arms was a fine Georgian inn of 3 stories. It was divided from its neighbour, the Bay Horse, by a ginnel called Ransom's Ginnel, and that led into yards behind. It was the first inn in Skipton to be acquired by Scott's Brewery, who had just opened a brewery in Skipton in what became Brewery Lane. Within 7 years, Scott had acquired the Bay Horse, the Thanet's Arms, and the Old George. The building was closed in 1967 and demolished, and it is now Just Jeans and Rowan Tree shops. Facing Just Jeans, go through the archway immediately to the left. This takes you into Bay Horse Yard, which was behind the Bay Horse, which is now gone, and the terraced of houses there are now holiday homes. Nearby is Bay Horse Court, which is a modern development of homes. The Bay Horse itself was knocked down, and the site was used for the Yorkshire Bank in 1898, towards the end of the Victorian era. At 54 to 56 High Street, just below the site of the former Bay Horse, was the Sun Inn, previously called the Black Bull. It had been an inn since at least 1650, after the Civil War. It had a new frontage with impressive entrances to Sun Yard behind it, and it is now Boots Pharmacy. John Bradley moved here from the old Sun in Middle Row, which became Manby's Ironmongers. We have now reached the point where Middle Row forms an island of shops and other premises on the right-hand side as we look down the High Street. The lane to the right of Middle Row is called Sheep Street, and this is where we find our next 4 pubs. Rather confusingly, though, the pubs in Middle Row have aspects that face both onto Sheep Street and onto High Street. At the top of Middle Row we can see Manby's Corner. Although it is now a shop, it was formerly an inn called the Sun, before the landlord went to the Black Bull and took the name with him. Manby's Ironmongers then took over the premises. 2 doors down from the old Sun in Middle Row was the Fountain, located in a gabled building which faces both onto the High Street and onto Middle Row. Like the Wheatsheaf and several other pubs, it was closed down by the authorities in 1907, losing its licence when the market moved out of the High Street. It is currently commercial premises, and at the moment it is occupied, as you can see, by an estate agent's. The view in the photograph is of its High Street facade. Number 82 and 84 High Street had a cellar lined with wooden benches, and by 1838 a beer house in the cellar known as Hell's Kitchen. It was probably here that a cellar was taken over by Mrs. Anne Ellison, a lady of temperance inclination, as an eating and coffee house. She preached temperance on steps, now gone, at nearby Sheep Hill, and was known as Ranting Nanny. She later set up a temperance hotel at number 2 Sheep Street, which is also number 60 High Street. Continue down Sheep Street to the bottom where it meets Caroline Square, and here you will find on the right-hand side our next pub, which is the Woolly Sheep. The Woolly Sheep is the remaining pub in Sheep Street and Middle Row from the 4 watering holes that were once here, the other 3 being the Sun, the Fountain and the Hell. The pub is sometimes described as being in Caroline Square, and was called the Devonshire Arms Inn when Mr. Robinson had it in 1852. The castle estates were split in 2 after the death of Lady Anne Clifford, with some going to her cousin's descendants along with Bolton Abbey, and the rest remaining with her descendants, the Earls of Thanet. There was no doubt rivalry between the hostelries owned by the castle and those owned by the Bolton Abbey heirs, who are now the Devonshires, with the southern part of the town centre being less castle and more Devonshire. The Devonshire Arms Inn became the Brick Inn because it had a brick wall or 2, which is a rarity in Skipton. Now it is the Woolly Sheep, and it is a Timothy Taylor's pub with a covered yard for dining and a fine old-style interior. It was Yorkshire's favourite pub in 2014, so check out the website. In 1827, The licensee was Story Watkinson. The eponymous brick walls can be seen in the passageway on the right of the Woolly Sheep. Near the Woolly Sheep, on the corner of Caroline Square and Swadford Street, is the curve of Ship Corner. This was the Ship Inn. When the Ship began, it was a farm in the town field of Skipton, and documents describe it as an almost derelict building with barns behind and 2 cottages on Swadford. It was then taken on by an innkeeper from Leeds who spruced it up as the Ship Inn. At the time, the buildings on the Caroline Square side were in line with Sheep Street and not as far back as they are today. It became quite a large establishment and was taken over by the Scott and Robinson Brewery. When the county decided to widen the road, it gave Scott and Robinson a sizable sum to knock it down and rebuild it 10 yards back with a curve. This gave us the building we have today, which is still known as Ship Corner. The whole building remained as the Ship for a while, but closed in 1924. Shops were then put in below, and upstairs it is now flats. If you follow the curve of Ship Corner into Swadford Street, you will see an archway that led to the rear of the building. On the voussoirs you can just make out how stables has been overprinted with the word garage, presumably when motor vehicles superseded the horse as the principal means of transport. From the Woolly Sheep cross Caroline Square using the traffic island, making first of all for the Yorkshire Trading Store opposite. From Yorkshire Trading, walk to the start of Newmarket Street and then cross to the bottom of the High Street, again using the traffic island.
We are now on the other side of Caroline Square, at the bottom of the High Street, at the Halifax Building Society building. This is where the Wheatsheaf Inn once stood. For many centuries, it was a very ancient pub that advertised stabling at the rear, reached by a ginnel on the right. Old photos show a small 2-storey building, almost like a cottage, and totally dwarfed by the rebuild of the Yorkshire Bank on its left. The Wheatsheaf closed in 1906 after the cattle market was removed from the High Street. The cattle market was in the High Street for several hundred years, originally at the top of the High Street and then later moved to the bottom of the High Street to Caroline Square, at which stage Newmarket Street was named Newmarket Street. From the Wheatsheaf, carriers ran to Addingham, Otley, York, Tadcaster, and in the other direction to Manchester, several times a week. The Wheatsheaf was demolished and replaced by Barclays Bank in 1910, and Barclays Bank then moved to more grandiose premises, and the building became shops, and then the Halifax Building Society.
From the Wheatsheaf, walk up the High Street until you reach the entrance to the Craven Court shopping centre. Whilst making your way up the High Street, look out for the 2 doors in on the other side of the road. This is one of Skipton's newer pubs, presumably taking its name from having entrances on both Sheep Street and the High Street.
Further up the High Street from the Wheatsheaf was the Hole in the Wall, now part of the Fat Face facade just before Craven Court. There was an inn here by 1709, but the current building is later. It is listed Grade 2, although much changed by conversion to shops. The hole in the name Hole in the Wall was an entrance to the Hole in the Wall Yard, also known as Kendall's Yard after John Kendall became innkeeper at the Hole in 1832. The doorway was preserved but shifted round the corner into Craven Court. It was a very popular pub for charabanc outings. From the hole in the wall, or fat face, continue north and cross Otley Street, and you come to what was the Old George Inn and then Rackham's. This was originally the George Inn, named for George III, and when his son took over, renamed the Old George. Skipton didn't want anything to do with George IV and wholly supported his wife Caroline in her fights against her husband. The wide entrance on the right led to the old stable yard with barns and stables. The building was two-storey until 1890, when it had a top storey added by the same man, R.A. Robinson, who altered the Joiners' Arms at the same time. He was probably from Scott and Robinson Brewery, who owned the building. Scott and Robinson owned most of the pubs in Skipton, and they were then sold to Whitbread, who closed the Old George in 1971, about the same time as they closed the hole in the wall. In 1827, the innkeeper here at the Old George was John Chippendale. Chippendale family was strongly associated with the High Street in Skipton, either owning or leasing several of the buildings over 2 centuries. This building became Brown and Muffs and then Rackham's department store and is Grade 2 listed. The future of the building is as yet unknown, as it was bought just before lockdown by Edinburgh Woolen Mills.
From the George Hotel, walk a little further up the High Street to what is now the Mountain Warehouse.
Further up the High Street from the Old George, we come to 29 High Street, the Thanet Arms Hotel, named for the Earl of Thanet. It was obviously named to rival the Devonshire Arms Hotel, later the Brick Inn or Brick Hall Inn, and now the Woolly Sheep, originally named for the Duke of Devonshire, who owned the building. The Thanet Arms had been called the Saddle and then the Horse and Jockey. It was closed in 1908 after the licence was refused and a shop window was put in. Next door to the Thanet, and still very much open, is the Red Lion, probably one of the oldest pubs in Skipton. Very much a living pub and owned by the brewer Green King and offering the usual Green King menu and range of beers. If you venture inside, you will see fireplaces from the 1600s with inscriptions. The Lion has medieval or Tudor arch cellars and may even have been a monastic establishment, although much rebuilt. If we go round the corner and into the yard at the back of the Lion, we can see some of the older features of the building, including mullioned windows.
From the front of the Red Lion, continue up the High Street and turn into the lane called Jerry Croft, which runs down the side of the Town Hall. From the Town Hall, walk down Jerry Croft and you will find the entrance to Red Lion Yard just before Marks and Spencer's. The Red Lion had barns and a large croft or small farm at the back called Red Lion Croft, which later became Jerry Croft, named after a Red Lion landlord called Jeremiah. In 1899, the cattle market moved from the High Street into Jerry Croft and then to Broughton Road, and the croft became the Town Hall car park. Behind the Red Lion is an L-shaped yard done as a beer garden, which has hardly changed from many years ago, and where you can see an original mullioned window. From the yard, return to Jerry Croft and turn right down the side of Marks and Spencer's and walk down to the Dale's Kitchen. From the Dale's Kitchen, continue round the corner, past the rear of the Albion pub to the crossroads, and then turn left onto Otley Street, which will bring you to the front facade of the Albion.
Otley Street was created in 1840 to 42 and the Albion was built around that time. From the front it is a very neat little building, but slightly quirkier at the side and back, with a cut-off corner and various bricked-up windows and doors. Old photos show the Albion being provided with beer from the dray of Scott and Robinson Skipton Brewery, and it then became a Tetley pub.
The Albion is now an independent pub owned by and run by people who provide home-cooked food and a variety of beer. They recently created a more extensive outdoor area and put in modern signage, though across the country we are losing not only many of our old pubs, but also our old pub signs as well. Like all our pubs, it has been hit hard by coronavirus. Facing the Albion, turn to your right and walk along Otley Street past the Law Courts to the crossroads. At the crossroads, pause and look up the road to your left, Rectory Lane, where you will see the Oddfellows Club, which are also licensed premises. Now go straight across the crossroads and walk on to the end where Otley Street meets Otley Road.
Going along Otley Street, we pass a number of interesting buildings, but none were pubs. At the end on the left is the police station, and then a garage. If you stop here and look to your left along Otley Road, up there was Spring Gardens, where the Butcher's Arms was. Spring Gardens seems to have been a market garden area. Opposite you is the back of the second Cross Keys, or maybe the third Cross Keys. This building was once the headmaster's house for the old grammar school next door, Ermisted's, which then moved to Gargrave Road. The Cross Keys moved here after its former home in Tradesman's Terrace was pulled down in the 1960s slum clearances. By then the school had long since moved to Gargrave Road. The 2007 recession sent the Cross Keys into decline and it closed its doors. It was a Tetley's pub and the landlord of the Fleece attempted to revive it, but it soon closed again and we suspect that coronavirus has ended any hope of it reopening. It is a listed building with a fine frontage onto Newmarket Street.
From the garage, retrace your steps a short way and cross over onto the other side of Otley Street. Then walk round the very sharp corner into Newmarket Street where you will see a mini roundabout. From here you can see the front of the Cross Keys. Now continue on Newmarket Street in the direction of the town centre until you reach the junction with Bunkers Hill on your right.
Returning into town along Newmarket Street, we come to the Tradesman's Terrace sign sitting on the grass on a little green space on your right. This was saved when Tradesman's Terrace opposite was demolished. Tradesman's Terrace contained the former Cross Keys pub, and at the time of the demolition this moved to the old headmaster's house at the grammar school nearby. Tradesman's Terrace and the former Cross Keys have now been replaced by greenery and a row of modern shops.
If you turn through 180 degrees to look across Newmarket Street, you will see this green space and the shops, the first one of which is the fish and chip shop that features in the story of our next pub, the Nag's Head. As you can see, the Nag's Head in Newmarket Street was in fact situated on the same side of the road as the one where you're standing, at the bottom of Bunkers Hill. It was a very old building and was probably from the 1700s or even 1600s. It closed about 1909 and became a fish and chip shop. A lot of Skipton folk remember the fish and chips from here. When it was pulled down in slum clearances, the proprietors, the Simpsons, moved to the new fish and chip shop opposite. In 1894, the Nag's Head had a new wash house and urinals. The windows of the pub said smoke room and tap room, and old documents distinguish between an innkeeper and a tapster. The exact location of our next pub, the Hart's Head, is something of a mystery. What we do know, however, is that William Lister was licensee in 1827, and that the 1848 poll book shows a William Lister living in Swadford Street. There is also another reference to a Hart's Head in Caroline Square. We also know that the Hart's Head was acquired by Scott & Co. in 1890 and was altered 4 years later by Mr. Robinson of Scott & Robinson's.
Continuing along Newmarket Street, we come to Court Lane on the right. If you go a little way along here, you'll find the Ref and Whistle, one of our newest micro pubs, opening about 4 years ago. This was converted from a shop. It's actually a very old building. Unfortunately, in the 1970s, the frontage was rebuilt. Very unfortunately, a rather disastrous conversion, probably made just before that became conservation area. The pub is named after the owner's father, who was a referee, and it serves real ales, a variety of real ales.
From the Ref and Whistle, retrace your steps to Newmarket Street and turn left. Having crossed on the crossing, turn to your right and walk along Newmarket Street, where you'll find our next 4 pubs, which are in order: the Devonshire Vaults, the Devonshire Arms, the Early Doors, and the Craven.
Our next stop is at the Art Shop at 22 Newmarket Street. This was once a pub called the Devonshire Vaults, but more fondly known as the Rat Pit. Many of those who drank here had aliases. It closed in 1978. Vaults in the north were what down south were called public bars, very basic and catering mainly for male working class drinkers. This was attached to Devonshire. In fact, there was a tunnel that ran from the cellars of the art shop across to the Devonshire itself. It was probably that this catered for the servants to drink at while their masters were drinking in the Devonshire. Next to the Vaults is the Devonshire, now a Wetherspoons pub serving the usual range of beers and reasonably priced food that Wetherspoons provide. It was built as a grand townhouse for the Dukes of Devonshire, with a stable block to the left which is now converted into housing. It became the New Inn and then the Devonshire Inn, challenging the Black Horses for eminence in the town. Efforts have been made to preserve some of the fine interior as well as the exterior, but the magnificent stairway was lost. Like many Yorkshire inns, the Devonshire had a bowling green at the rear, which is still there. Early Doors is another micropub, or pop-up pub, which closes its doors early but opens them early too. Small but popular, with a range of ales. It is on the site of an earlier hostelry called the Craven Arms, which was at 12 Newmarket Street and included the Early Doors site and the estate agent next door. The Craven Arms became known locally as the Little Craven, in contrast to Big Craven, which was the Craven Hotel in Cavendish Street. In the 1890s, J. Varley, a local architect, designed an archway to lead to the rear of the Craven Arms and a rear extension. The archway was demolished when the adjacent buildings were demolished to create an entrance to what became the bus station. For a while, the bus station and the Craven Arms shared toilets at the back. The Craven Arms closed in 1974. From the Devonshire, we have continued down Keighley Road and turned left to come to the Unicorn. This was a small inn, 2 stories high, but when Keighley Road was widened, the owners were Bentley Yorkshire Brewery, and they were paid enough in order to give up some yards of road space to rebuild their pub on a much grander scale. It is no longer a pub but a small hotel on the first and second floors, with the ground floor being shops. After the rebuild, it had a distinctive BYB window put in at the side and a unicorn symbol. A little further along Keighley Road, just past Castle Street, on the corner of Castle Street, is the Tradesmen's Club. This is not exactly a pub, but like most working men's clubs, it is a popular place for locals to meet up, and has weekend events. You can visit it without being a member and be signed in by a member. This is in the Star Buildings, which were previously the Star Pub, or Inn, in 1827 owned by Jeremiah Harrison. The archway to the right of the Working Men's Club led to the Star Yard. The Star was another casualty of the big reduction in licences given by magistrates in 1907. Henry Proctor, carrier, went from the Star to Askrigg every Saturday and to Bradford every Wednesday. This is one of the many carriers who started from the various local inns, heading off in different directions into the Dales towards Manchester or York.
You will find the archway that Claire refers to running down the side of the Tradesmen's Club from Keighley Road. As you can see in the passageway, there is evidence of the old Star Inn. If you continue down the passageway, you will come to the site of the inn's yard. Now turn to look across Keighley Road to the other side.
Opposite the Working Men's Club, or Star, is the Fleece. This was an older building, substantially altered in 1892 by the architect Shuttleworth. It was a Bentley Yorkshire Brewery pub. At first it had a 3-storey warehouse behind it and other buildings beside it, one of them being a Sunday school, but these were mostly pulled down in the 1960s. If you look at the frontage, it looks more like 2 buildings than one, and the left one has been substantially altered and may have had an entrance to a yard. It offers comedy nights and other entertainment and a variety of cask ales.
Now cross over Keighley Road on the crossing and go down the alleyway alongside Berry's Florists to the bus station. Having entered the bus station, turn to your left and walk down to the canal side. Continue along by the canal and then cross over the Gallows footbridge, which you see ahead of you. Having crossed over the footbridge, walk straight ahead towards Tesco's, where the road that you are on meets Cavendish Street, where you will see to your left our next pub, the Craven Hotel.
We are now at the Craven Hotel, just known as the Craven, or the Big Craven. This was built as a station hotel with extensive stables for horses. The first Skipton station was next door, where Tesco now is. Men from the farms and villages who wanted to go somewhere on the railways for business had to ride into town and leave their horses somewhere for the day or longer. Plus, the nearby coal merchants supplied coal to the engines, and coal was moved by horses. At a later date, the auction mart was nearby, on the site where Morrison's now is. The Craven, like most railway hotels, is a very solid building with high ceilings and retains some of the air of those glorious days. Unfortunately, the railway station moved, and the Midland Hotel was built near the new station. The Craven is not on the tourist trail, but it is the only Thwaites Inn in Skipton. Thwaites is a Lancashire brewery founded in 1807. The Craven has enough space for parties and watching sports and tends to attract people visiting nearby Tesco's and Morrison's and local regulars. It was used for some years for jazz sessions. It has been hit by coronavirus and is advertising for a new tenant. The stables have been converted to housing recently. Across the road from the Craven, and in contrast to its grandness, is the modest little railway corner tavern, once a drinking establishment with wooden pews lining the walls, where the men frowned if a woman ventured in. Old photos show men in cloth cats, probably farmers, attending the auction mart, which was there where the Morrison site now is. The railway was a Tetley's and then a pubmaster pub. It is now a free house and very pleasant, with a restaurant and B&B. Book a meal in advance as it tends to get busy. From here you have a choice. You can go along the Black Walk behind Morrison's to the railway station and Heriot's, which was the old Midland Hotel, or you can go down Cavendish Street.
Taking the Black Walk route from the railway involves crossing over Cavendish Street and walking down the side of the Tesco store. Having walked down the side of Tesco, you will find that the pavement becomes a footpath to the station, which is known locally as the Black Walk. Further on, you'll find that the footpath crosses over a local stream called Ellerbeck and then runs down behind Morrison's supermarket. When you reach the station car park, turn to your right and walk down towards the main road. Turn to your right on reaching the main road, where you will see on the other side our next pub, which is Heriot's, formerly known as the Midland Hotel.
Opposite the station is Heriot's, which was once the Midland Hotel. It was built by the Midland Railway and has lovely ironwork. It changed its name around the year 2000, when the vet Heriot was very well known, and it also changed the name of its restaurant to Rhubarb to attract visitors who wanted something Yorkshire. It is a popular name for events and weddings, being convenient to the station. It is very comfortable with a pleasant courtyard and, unusually for Skipton pubs, parking of its own. From here, turn right along Broughton Road back towards town.
Cross over Broughton Road and walk into town until you reach Majestic Wine on your left-hand side. Here you will find the junction with Brewery Lane. If you look between the two mill buildings on either side of Brewery Lane, you will see ahead of you a modern block of flats that marks the approximate site of where the Scott and Robinson Brewery used to be. The brewery was begun by Scott of Armley in 1816 and was originally known as the Scott Brewery, later becoming Scott and Robinson's. It used water from a spring that fed into an underground reservoir at Massive Flats, and it was taken over in 1912 by Bentley's Yorkshire Brewery, who closed it down. By then, 16 of Skipton's pubs were tied to Scott and Robinson, and BYB was itself taken over by Whitbread in 1968. The Craven Herald of 2004 recorded the Jolly Sailor pub at Belmont Bridge, where Broughton Road crosses over the Leeds and Liverpool Canal. After Belmont Bridge, Broughton Road becomes Swadford Street. Continue towards the centre of town and then cross on the crossing to our next two pubs, which are Chew's Bar and the Sound Bar.
What is now the post office was built in 901 as Chew's Bar. Kendall Chew had run the Hole in the Wall pub, and he then bought the Ship. His relative Fred Chew with Doris Chew set up a bar here in the interwar period. In 2000, licensees from Ilkley turned this into Breeze Bar. It developed a poor reputation in its later years and closed in 2012. In the 1980s, it flooded badly when water from the nearby Wallerhill Beck flooded this part of town. In recent years, there has been a flood prevention programme to stop that happening again. Like many pubs in Skipton, this became an Enterprise Inn when Enterprise took over Whitbread and Bass pubs in the area. Soundbar is a fairly recent addition to Skipton, has been very popular with vinyl fans, as you can both buy and listen to vinyl records there. It's a fine shop front in a building with long first floor windows, probably built or refronted in the early 1900s.
From the Soundbar, look across Swadford Street and you will see our next pub, which is the Cock and Bottle.
From here you can get a much better view of the Cock and Bottle and how it crouches between two larger buildings which were built much later than the pub. The pub was there by the late 1600s and probably earlier, although the front has been altered. The traditional interior can be visited later. It has a typical long yard behind that backs onto the White Rose.
Cross over Swadford Street once again and head back towards Belmont Bridge. When you reach the fish and chips shop, turn round the corner into Coach Street. If you turn right immediately before the Yorkshire Rose and go through the wooden gates that face you, you can access the yard at the rear of the Cock and Bottle.
Yorkshire Rose, formerly the Rose and Crown. This had a new facade in 1887 designed by Varley, and from the roof line it appears to be two buildings put together, which may have been done at that time. Varley designed several pub refronts, including the Fleece and here, and may have been related to the T. Varley who ran the Red Lion at one stage. The Yorkshire Rose changed its name in about 2010 from the Rose and Crown, which was a popular name for pubs that had begun in Tudor times, as a Rose and Crown was the livery of the Tudor monarchs from the House of Lancaster. The rose was red and white, the white being because Henry Tudor married the heiress to the House of York. The local Clifford lords of the castle and Lady Anne Clifford were keen Lancastrians and would not have been so keen about a switch to blatant support for the House of York. The castle probably once owned the site, and hence the original choice of name. Inside it is a comfortable size, not cosy like the Railway or Cock and Bottle, and not large like the Craven or Black Horse. It closed for coronavirus and has only recently got going again. From here, cross the road directly across into the yard that used to be the stable yard for horses pulling canal boats. The Agra restaurant began life as a canal warehouse. In more recent years it became a pub called the Barge Inn, and then Lock, Stock and Barrel. Lock, Stock and Barrel was there for about 15 years until it burnt out. It was subsequently rebuilt and became a restaurant, and then the Agra restaurant. If you step back, you can get a good look at it. The wooden area over the front door is a recent addition, as well as the side being a recent addition. Once you've had a look, do go beyond the Agra down to the side of the canal and turn right. And you emerge on the canal wharf. And on your right is the pub called the Boathouse. The Boathouse on your right is a fairly recent addition to the Skipton pub scene. It was previously a very popular cafe. It now serves a variety of real ales, and it's a good place to sit outside on a summer evening. It doesn't serve food. If you go through the archway, you return to Coach Street, where you should turn right and then immediately left to find the beer engine. The beer engine is very definitely a micro pub. It was one of the first in Yorkshire and thought to be the very first in North Yorkshire. The building was originally a whitesmith warehouse and shop, selling items made of metal such as tin. The warehouse was run by a Catholic man who then allowed a Catholic school to be created above, accessed by stone steps at the side. Cosy and popular, the beer engine serves craft beers and snacks.
From the beer engine, retrace your steps and turn right onto Coach Street, and then immediately right again into Victoria Street, which runs up the side of Craven Stationery, and here you'll find the Narrowboat, our next pub.
A mix of conversion and new build in the 1990s in a traditional style, with a front arcade with stone columns. This was the first non-smoking pub in Skipton, and became popular as an after-work venue for office workers and also as a folk music venue. The tables under the front arcade are popular with those who like to be outside. Many times winner of Real Ale Awards, it is one of the small market town taverns chain that is now linked to Ockles Brewery on the Isle of Man.
From the Narrowboat, to return to Coach Street and turn right, and then right again immediately before the Canal Bridge into Canal Street, and there you will find our next pub, the Royal Shepherd. The Royal Shepherd is another of our traditional pubs, named after the Shepherd Lord, who was a Lord Clifford during the War of the Roses, and who was sent away to be brought up amongst shepherds for his own safety. It was built a long time ago and has a few structural problems which cause headaches for the tenants. It became a Copper Dragon pub when the Copper Dragon Brewery started in Skipton, and it is now owned by Enterprise Inns and has had a recent change of licensee to someone who has brought a reputation for good food from their previous pub. The yard is popular with families, and on warm evenings people often drink outside leaning against the canal wall. Retrace your steps to Coach Street and turn right over the canal bridge and then left in front of the tea room and gift shop which you'll see ahead of you. A little further on down the road you'll come to our final pub on this tour, which is the Mess Room, one of the latest additions to the Skipton pub scene.
It's named Mess Room because the adjacent building was for a long time the fire station, and the fire service adopted names from the Royal Navy and Armed Forces.
Retrace your steps from the mess room back to the tea room and gift shop and turn left into Coach Street, where up ahead of you you'll see our starting point, the Commercial Inn. We hope you've enjoyed the tour.